Matthew, first of all, huge thank you for coming on the podcast. For anyone who doesn't know you, give us a little introduction of yourself, where it all started and where you began.
Yeah, well, firstly, mate, thank you very much for having me on, kind of during these unconventional times, should we say. My name's Matthew Lewis Carter. I'm a presenter based in London. I worked in the fitness industry for probably about 6 years, and then I was always more interested towards the end of end of my time in the fitness industry. I was always really interested in the impact exercise has on the brain and how it makes you feel. So this year, I went back to university to start my master's in psychology and neuroscience and mental health, and yeah, that's kind of where I am at today, really. So I do quite a bit of work online on social media. I get to work with some cool brands. I get to do some good bits of traveling when work is going, but just like everybody else at the moment, work isn't going. So it's trying to adapt to a new way of life.
It's normal times that's going on, and that's why I thought you'd be great to have on the day to kind of give us your spin on kind of mental health. Obviously, we know what it's like. People are out of work. It's challenging times. People don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know how they're making income. Usually when all these stress and anxieties come in, mental health usually plays a big role, and that's why I thought it'd be great to have you on. When you first started out, did you struggle with mental health, and that's what made you want to try and get into it a wee bit? Because a lot of people have said that's why they wanted to help people, because they maybe felt the same themselves. Was that your journey into it, or how did you kind of really start?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's an interesting way of putting it, because a lot of people say the real reason people get into mental health is because they want to get a better grasp of it themselves, because of perhaps struggles and anxieties that they're going through. I can actually say that I've never really suffered, touch with anxiety or depression. I have had little bouts of anxiety, which I think has been brought on by the use of social media, because I spend quite a bit of time on there now for work, and it's only within the past kind of year and a half that every now and then I'll have a bit of I kind of find like anxiety, it affects people in different ways. And it's an interesting one, because anxiety it's something that hasn't happened. So there was a Greek Stoic philosopher that said, men are disturbed not by things, but by the principles and notions that are formed when concerning things.
What do you mean that stuff that hasn't happened? People worrying about things that could happen potentially. Is that where that anxiety comes from? They're worried that they're going to lose their house, or they're not going to have enough money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, looking at it now's a perfect period, and I think this period is really going to teach us a lot about mental health and perhaps the stigmas attached to it, because it's something that I suppose maybe it's been a bit of a buzzword over the past year and a half. People they hear it and they go, oh, yeah, maybe it's not a real thing because we can't see it. But yeah, anxiety basically is stories that you're building up in your head. So basically, if you were suffering with forms of anxiety or depression, perhaps you might go and see a therapist. So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive is anything in the mind, behavior is actions that you do. Perhaps you go and see a therapist, and talking therapy is a way that they go about it, and it's very much about discussing issues in the present and the best way to kind of alleviate any of those problems that you have. And during this period, there'll be a lot of people who will be building up these stories in their head. So let's say, okay, we're not working. That means I can't pay my bills. What happens if I can't pay my bills? I can't pay my mortgage. Am I going to lose the house? And you build up on the worst case scenarios. Now, anxiety is perfectly normal. It's kept us safe, similar to stress for thousands of years, and bouts of it is very helpful, and it can make meaningful change. But too much of it can be the formings of a disorder, and it can really be quite a burden on somebody's life.
What do you think? What would you recommend somebody do if they're maybe struggling with anxiety?
Yeah, well, so first and foremost, depending on the severity of your anxiety, there's a few kind of coping mechanisms that I'd kind of go through. And I think, first of all, I spent a lot of time in the fitness industry. So exercise for me has always been paramount in clearing my head. I spent a lot of time, and I think as guys, it's probably something you'd be guilty with, but being very focused, body image obsessed. So kind of did that thing in my early 20s of just wanting to be the guy on Men's Health and wanting to be the guy on Men's Fitness. And then as I kind of went through that stage and I kind of got through the back end of that, I actually found that exercise has much more of an impact on my mental health than it does my physical, but it's a journey that you go through. And something I discussed on a recent podcast recently was actually the impact that exercise does have on our mental health. So there's an interesting study in the British Journal of Psychiatry. Basically, they looked at 945 patients over a 12-month period. And then what they did is they divided the patients into 3 different areas of exercise. So one was yoga, one was an aerobic-based approach, so sort of long-distance running, things like that, and then anaerobic, so things like, your popular HIIT classes and things that are kind of in every studio in London at the moment. And then what they did is they looked at the response rate at the end of the 12-month period to see how people were or how they engaged with the exercise. So they did 3 60-minute sessions a week. And what they found was that at the end of the 12-month period, now obviously a few people would drop off because it's a 12-month study, but 84% of people who were suffering depression or severe depression had reduced. So that's 84% out of the 984. Obviously, a few people would have dropped off of that. And for them, a really interesting thing about that is that the results after the 3-month period were the most pronounced in the results. So that's kind of going to show that the sooner you start something, the sooner it's going to have an impact on your mental health. So people kind of, during this period especially, and that could be something that's going, I actually prefer to use the term movement over exercise, because I think exercise sometimes it draws connotations and people are a little bit like, it's a bit of a burden.
When you say exercise, people jump to conclusions as well. They maybe, exercise can obviously be anything, something for walking, going a walk, going out, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Exercise, people think getting into the gym and lifting the heaviest dumbbells.
Yeah, totally. And that's, I think, sometimes where it puts it off. I know there was, I think doctors up in, was it the Shetland Islands? And that's your neck of the woods, isn't it? A bit further up. They were prescribing just going out for a walk as part of their medication. So doctors were literally giving out movement as part of their as part of their diagnosis. Once they'd looked at them, they go, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to prescribe you, instead of with antipsychotic drugs, we're going to prescribe you with going for a 30-minute walk. And it's really interesting to see the route that people are starting to go. So that was a really interesting study. And I always found, so going back to what we can do during this period, is that, exercise should be seen as optional, but movement really is essential. And it doesn't matter what that movement is, if it's playing five-a-side with the boys, or if it's going for a walk, but the sooner that you start integrating that into your day, the quicker it will have an impact on you. So going back to that study, the prevalence in the 3-month period was really, really strong. So people that started that straight away saw a return on their investment, as it were. So there's a few things. So exercise, trying to do that, adding that into your day somehow. One thing I do is journaling in some sort of way or another. So every night before we kind of go to bed, we'll sit in bed and we'll write out a list of things that we need to do for the next day. And obviously during this period, it's a little bit more different. So there's something very satisfying about putting a pen through the paper once you've done something. So any tasks that you've got, even if it's making lunch or taking the dog for a walk, put that on your to-do list. And on top of the to-do list as well, I always have 3 non-negotiables at the top. And that's something, when you start doing that more and more often, it just becomes part and parcel of who you are. So the 3 non-negotiables for me are normally exercise, study of some sort. It doesn't matter what it is. If you've got an interest in something, find something, you go on Google and you can search that, do that, and then like a random act of kindness. So it can be something so simple as offering to buy somebody a coffee, and then you start to do that more and more often, and it comes to just becomes a habit, really. And the more and more that you do that, it just sticks.
Do you think, just like making, obviously you were saying about writing things down, your 3 non-negotiables and so on, do you think it's that kind of sense of achievement and sticking that pen through it, the wee small, I've done that, let's get the next one done, that kind of builds that?
Massively so. I mean, I can't remember where I was talking about this on a podcast the other week about people who set goals, and they looked at University of Texas, did a really interesting study on patients that had multiple sclerosis, and basically the ones who set goals, the severity of their symptoms was less than those that didn't. And I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by goal setting.
Yeah.
that's, you know, some people are like, oh, I've got my 5-year goals, I've got my 10-year goals. But I think, you know, if you almost look at it as like an umbrella or a parachute at the top, and then you kind of put areas that you kind of want to be, and then you feed down from that. And every single day, you just try and move the needle a little bit to get you a little bit closer to where you want to be. And, you know, there's going to be days where, you know, it's going to be cloudy and things just won't work. And there's going to be days it's going to be sunny. And, you know, you'll wake up with an extra spring in your step. But it's just starting. You know, there's a Swiss psychologist called Carl Jung, and he said, the fool is the precursor to the savior, which basically means anytime you start something, you're going to be so shit at it, you'll be embarrassed at how shit you are. But eventually you'll build new habits. And every time you learn a new skill or a new habit, it actually changes the formation of your brain. So it's called neuroplasticity. And the more you do that, the more that habit starts to stick, and the better you'll get at it. So exercise, that's kind of a key one. Writing down as much as you can, I find really helps.
The 5-minute journal, have you seen it?
I have seen it. Yeah, there's all sorts of journals out there.
It's something that I had got as a gift. Somebody had got me, and it was more or less in the morning when you first wake up. You go in and you write 3 things that you're grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes I had done it a couple of times, and I was like, I had really to think about it, and I was like, I'm like, wow, I've got so much going on.
Yeah,
I should be grateful for, but I was struggling to kind of put it down on paper.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I kind of researched something and kind of read a few things on it, and it was in the small things. Waking up this morning, being able to have a glass of water. Do you know what I mean?
Mate, absolutely.
Starting off that wee bit better. Do you know what I mean? Positive instead of waking up and getting on your phone. Do you know what I mean? And I've actually got into the habit now of I don't sleep in the same room as my phone. See, when I woke up in the morning, the first thing I done was I grabbed my phone. I was going through my emails, going through my social media. I was going texts.
Been there.
The cycle before I go to bed, before I wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
Do a nice cycle to get yourself into.
Not at all. And so, mate, this is 2 tips I'm going to give to the listeners of this. So I did an Instagram live with somebody called the Brain Doctor the other week, and she's absolutely amazing. Like if you want somebody to look to follow on social media, have a look at the stuff that she does, because it's really brilliant. But one thing that I've always struggled with is the amount of time, I suppose, spent on social media. And I feel like the more time, it's the dose that makes the poison of anything. So it's great for connecting with people, but too much of it, you can kind of fall down that rabbit hole, can't you? And you're like, oh my God, I've been on it for like 4 hours. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's something, and I've tried so many different techniques. And she said when we were on, so next time you're done with what you've done with on social media, simply log out of the app. And every time, because what we do is we have a lot, especially with our generation as well, millennials especially, they're always constantly trying to swipe away boredom. And actually out of boredom, we get a lot of our genius, we get a lot of our creativity, but so much of us, we're constantly trying to look for something to fill that void. So she said, every time that you finished on, so first of all, go onto social media for a purpose. Like this morning I went on because there's a couple of stories I had to upload for something and a couple of messages I had to reply to. And then once you've done that, log out of the app. And then if you find yourself bored, like naturally you will just, you'll just pick up your phone and you'll do it. But then you'll see that you're logged out of the app. But then you need to ask yourself, okay, what reason am I going onto this app for? And honestly, I've been doing this for a week now, and it's really changed how much time I've spent on social media.
I resonate with that, because the amount of times I go to text someone back, the next minute I'm on social media, the next minute I'm there 20 minutes and I'm like, what was that?
Yeah.
Back again.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Mate, honestly, so promise me you'll try that from this weekend, because I've spoken to a lot of people, and I've tried so many different things. I think just the way the brain looks at the situation where you go, actually, what purpose am I going to get out of doing this now? And even if you do put your phone down and you're away with the fairies for a little bit, fine, like no problem at all. So I found that really helps, because it's great at the moment. We're so connected, but at the same time, loneliness is a big issue, and we've never been so disconnected. And as humans, we crave that physical touch, that physical connection. I think there's an interesting study that if a waiter touches your arm, you're more likely to give them a greater tip than opposed to those that don't. So humans, we have this built-in connection that needs satisfying. And although even this is great, but this podcast would be better if we were sat down opposite each other, because how much of body language is built off, how we gesticulate between each other and how our body responds like that. So logging out of your phone is something that's really helped me this week. Building exercise into your routine, and spending a bit of time to journal. And I know journaling is sometimes that, and it doesn't have to be, like you said, writing down the gratitude, because I've tried things like that as well. But and especially, if you said to me a couple of years ago, you should journal, I'd be a bit like, oh, really? It's not quite for me. But it's just trying to start that new habit of doing it. And, starting a new habit, that the first time you do it, it's like walking through a field. The grass is really thick, it's really overgrown, it's bloody hard work. But then the more you start to walk through that field, the easier it is to walk through it. The grass gets trodden on, you get to memorize the way a bit more way. And building habits is exactly the same sort of way. So
you're going to happen overnight. It's going to take a wee bit of time to kind of build that in you as well. I do like writing things down in paper and journaling and so on, because sometimes then when I reread it, like I'm actually reading somebody else's story, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. So
no, it does, absolutely.
Down, whatever I'm thinking, whatever I'm maybe stressed out about, what's going on in the world and so on. And then when I reread it again, I'm like, it's just reading it from somebody else's kind of point of view. So I think it gives me a different spin. We spoke about journaling and so on. Would you recommend anything like meditation or anything like that?
Yes, I would. I struggle with, my girlfriend does a lot of meditation. Okay. I did one thing I have looked on, and I'm getting a chap on this week who does a lot on breath work, but simply, I did speak on my stories of the week about reducing anxiety, and one simple way of doing it is simply just breathing in through the nose for 4, slight pause at the top, and then exhaling through the nose for 4, and trying to do that throughout the day. I've actually found is, because I think, you get the, kind of the image of meditating, that you've got to sit down, you've got to wear a big yellow costume, whatever it is that they wear, and you've got to take yourself into that Zen spot for half an hour, wherever it is. But I think it's actually finding moments in the day that when you are stressed, it's, the body's constantly trying to find that state of homeostasis, that point in the middle. And when you are stressed, adrenaline's released into the bloodstream, you kind of go into that fight or flight mode, and the natural impact for you to do would be to try and breathe in more. But when actually what you want to be doing is slowing your breath down. So a lot of people who suffer from panic attacks, the first thing they'll do is they'll start to breathe a lot harder, a lot quicker, when actually what you want to be doing is just taking a moment, understanding what's happening to your body. So if you're in a stressful position, if you're feeling slightly anxious, your body will start to go into this fight or flight mode. But when you're aware that your body's actually doing this, you can take a moment, take a big deep breath in through the nose for 4, slight pause at the top, and then exhale through the nose for 4 as well. So that's something that I've tried to, even just going out for a walk with the dog, just nasal breathing is something that I've been trying to do more of.
Seems to be becoming a lot more bigger now. People, workouts and so on, people are encouraging nasal breathing and so on. What's kind of science behind it? I haven't done a great deal of
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a great deal about it, to be honest, mate. It's all I do know is that it's trying to reset that balance, between going into fight or flight mode, which, and again, it's miniature stresses that we all have, and our life these days is kind of built around these miniature stresses. So getting up in the morning, and as you said before, if your phone's there, you get an email or you've got a bill that comes through the door, you're going to get these miniature stresses throughout the day, and it has just as much as an impact on your mental health as it will your physical health. So it's trying to reset that balance. So when the adrenal glands release cortisol and your heart rate starts to come up, your breathing increases, we need to find a way just to mitigate that and bring the body back to that neutral balance. So I think essentially that's the power of the breath and what it does to it. It's really interesting stuff. It's something I'm going to try and do.
Seen it? Did you see it with the rugby team with the sellotape round about their mouth?
No,
I don't know where it was. Something that was some rugby team were trying to kind of encourage their players to do
that nasal breathing. Really,
and these guys were running about with like duct tape round about their mouth. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they were kids and they just set themselves.
Yeah.
They were running away in the
camera.
No. That was how I was interested. Is there any kind of, we spoke a wee bit of meditation there, is there anything that you recommend with meditation? Types of meditation?
Yeah, well, sure, I am new to it, but I think it's not being too worried if the mind wanders.
Headspace. And I really enjoyed that, and it was only 10 minutes a day you needed to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Enough to kind of give you that wee kind of chilled out moment, and then get back about your day again, and that's good because it was only 10 minutes.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's perfect. And then if you start to integrate that more into your day, it's going to have a huge impact. Again, it's going back to reducing those stress levels. We talk about and we discuss stress so much in the forms of exercise, but what impact that has is having on our mental health is a huge area. And being able to take yourself out of that headspace, quote unquote, as it were, is really important. So for me, nasal breathing is something I've tried to do a bit more. I find that really does benefit, and not being so afraid if your mind does wander. One technique we did try the other day, me and my partner, is that you simply sit in complete silence for 10 minutes, then you just count in your head 1 to 10, and then 10 back down. And anytime you feel yourself wandering, you restart back down at 1. And it's quite hard. Like the first couple you've got, and then it's amazing how quickly the mind starts to wander, which isn't a problem because you'll go to places that you didn't think you were. Yeah, you would.
And normal then that you're, well, obviously it's normal, but should you be always trying to bring yourself back again, or should you be letting your mind kind of wander with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's trying to reinstate that element of calm that we're all searching for, but at the same time, it's interesting to let the mind go somewhere, because that's a lot of the time where our best elements of creativity and genius comes from, is letting the mind wander. And going back to swiping away the boredom is something that us millennials tend to do. And even the way people advertise now to our generation, they do it in 5 or 6 second bouts, just because they know our attention span is like that. So when you get used to being uncomfortable with that boredom, I think it can bring a lot of benefit.
Yeah, definitely. So talking a wee bit back again about the kind of signs of depression, there's obviously a lot of people, we're all in the same boat, we're struggling and so on. Maybe you're staying in a house, family member, a friend, you might feel is a wee bit depressed. What kind of signs you can show with someone who's depressed?
Yeah, I mean, it's telltale signs would be
Those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, telltale signs would be, somebody kind of down in themselves, not talking so much. It's very dependent on the individual, really. It's kind of 1 in 4 people will suffer with a mental health problem each year. So it's something, and I think it is 74% of people will have a mental health problem by the age of 24. So, and I really think the use of social media and this perhaps unachievable world that a lot of kids seeing. I think I was just on the kind of cusp of missing that, so we never really had it in school. But I just think it's something that's going to have to be addressed at some point or another.
I think people are comparing themselves to each other.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's tricky because I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with social media, but I know that it can be, we're very much a culture that we have this new currency, which is likes, I suppose. So Instagram likes and Facebook likes, and it's amazing. So yeah, exactly. And I mean, these kind of dopamine pathways in our brain, they'll light up when we get a like, and we can put our whole value of kind of who we are as a person on a certain amount of likes on a social media post. And even the way that we scroll. So I think the scrolling system very similar as you'd see in a casino in Las Vegas when you put money in, and the one-armed bandit, and the dopamine effect that it has on that. So scrolling is that kind of similar mechanism. But anxiety and depression is going to be very it's something that we're going to probably see a lot of in this period and hear a lot of. And I think we're going to come out the back end of it, and people will have a much greater understanding, even if you've never suffered from little bouts of anxiety, so bouts of worry or fear. I'm sure at this point, at least some people, or you might start to feel those feelings for the first time, even if it's minor, but it's being aware of them. So one thing that we do, or you can look at, is negative automatic thoughts is something that comes into your head quite a lot. So going back to anxiety and the stories that we tell ourselves, another good way of putting it is automatic negative thoughts. So you think of them as little ants that come into your head. So every time you get a little automatic negative thought, it's kind of like a little ant coming into your head. Now, the more and more of these ants that you have coming into your head, the more likelihood there is going to be of an infestation. So this is where it's going back to coping mechanisms before, like starting to write down these thoughts as soon as they come down. So say I have an automatic negative thought that comes into my head saying, I'm not good enough to go back to university and do this course. You can write it down on pen to paper. Then you can really question that, like, oh, why aren't I? Why can't I do that? And I think it is taking that moment to do it and giving yourself that self-realization that, oh, actually you can do this, because at the end of the day, we're all making this up as we go along, aren't we?
No, we're all just winging it here.
Mate, absolutely. Well,
I like that as well, because what was it I heard somebody speak about as well, the 5 whys. You ask yourself why 5 times when you get a negative, like why do you feel like that, and you end up, without you knowing it, you've branched off 5 or 6 answers, and you don't really know how to answer them, and you kind of start to kind of put that down. So what was the telltale signs for people who have depression? Is it the maybe mood swings? Is it that they're maybe not socialising with people? What is it? Totally, it'll depend on who the person is, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, as you said there, it's gonna be different from person to person, really. Some people might be, I guess, just more self-doubt, feelings of worry, of anxiousness. But what is important as well, we see a lot through media at the moment as well, that that taking the time to talk to people is a huge part of that. Things like X Factor and things like that now will do like a 2-minute slot during the advert breaks just to talk to people, which is really important. And I think, as cliche as it is, it really does begin with a conversation. Psychotherapist's job would be to sit down with somebody and discuss these feelings and talk about the present moment and why they're feeling the way that they are. And people say, charity starts at home, and I truly believe that being able to connect with your loved ones and really ask them how they're feeling. Like a couple of months ago, I had a mate ask me, how are you feeling? And the natural way to that would go, yeah, I'm good. But then he said, no, how are you really feeling? And don't get me wrong, it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, but there's something very gratifying about dumping off all those kind of those negative thoughts that you might have in your head to somebody.
Sometimes you need a wee push as well. See
that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Somebody making you feel, but how are you really? Do you know what I mean? And then you can't give them the same answer again. So
yeah, exactly.
A wee bit more deeper into it.
That's it.
Helping somebody, sorry I broke you up there, helping someone with maybe depression, can you help them maybe like an arm round the shoulder? Obviously right now you can't, but maybe making a phone call or something like that, would that help them? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I know since this period started, Mind, one of the leading UK mental health charities, their kind of phone calls have gone through the roof, really, with people suffering with bouts of anxiety.
Is there a helpline or so that you could phone?
Yeah, there is, and it might be good actually if you can pop the link after this podcast, because it gives people an opportunity to talk. So I think it really does start, first of all, with that conversation, and then you can assess through there if they need to go and perhaps see a therapist or take a cognitive-based therapy kind of approach. But it's
good, something like that as well, because sometimes where it's like you don't want to speak to the boys about it in case they judge you. You don't want to speak to your family in case they maybe get worried about you. So having something like that would be really good, because it's somebody you don't know. You can maybe dump all your thoughts down. And
exactly. And unfortunately, suicide rates between guys between men is quite startling, and it is quite scary. And the benefits of just having or starting a conversation. So if you are struggling with something, doesn't matter what it is. It's the hardest part sometimes is, I guess, it's reaching out, and I think it's taking onus sometimes that if you see a friend who is struggling with something, to really take the time to try and get them to open up, because as guys we struggle sometimes to emote, and we wear this kind of bulletproof vest all the time. It's this kind of this armor that we have. So
you reach out, we can deal with us.
Yeah, exactly. But then to a degree, it's going to take a toll. So it's if you've got, or you see friends kind of who are struggling a little bit, especially during a time like this, taking that moment to reach out really trying to, don't ask them how they are, ask them how they really are. And you might get a response that perhaps you weren't quite expecting.
When do you think it takes that turning point where you really need to go and sit down and speak to someone, go and see a professional or so on? What's that difference between, you know what, I'm just maybe having a down day the day, to actually feeling that you're struggling with it a wee bit more? What's that kind of difference?
Well, I suppose if you feel like your relationships are being affected, if you feel like you don't have the concentration at work, I guess if you have kind of like a nihilistic approach, the approach that life doesn't have the purpose that it used to, when you start to get feelings and thoughts like that, then it could be time just to begin that conversation. Like, there's so many mental health charities out there that you can reach out to and just speak to on the phone. Just perhaps you don't like going in to see somebody just yet, but there are so many talking therapies that are available to people these days as well. And I think a lot of the time people look at psychotherapy perhaps as going in and sitting and lying on a couch like you see in the films, but it's just basically just trying to piece together what's going on in your life at the moment, and the coping mechanisms that can be put in place to get you back to where you want to be.
And do you think that, I think obviously a lot to do, people are now, I had a friend as well who recently, and he went and spoke to the doctor and so on, and they got him on medication, and of course obviously the doctors do the best for him, but he felt sometimes that the medication was making him feel a wee bit even more down, where he wasn't himself anymore. What's the kind of difference with that? I know there's obviously totally different avenues you can go down, like talk about medication, meditation and speaking to someone, but what's your thoughts on that kind of, people want, when something's up with you, you want that, there's that tablet to take that away, there's this.
Yeah, of course. Like, antipsychotics is it's a tricky one, this, because but in the 1960s there was a doctor in Brooklyn, New York, and he came up basically with the idea that the reason why we get a lot of mental health issues is because of you might have heard, the dopamine imbalance is the kind of thing. So you take the tablet, it's kind of brings back that balance back. But a lot of research now has showed that that's wrong. And a lot of the drugs that people are taking, they may work in the short term, almost like the power of the brain is really fascinating, and the placebo effect especially it is really incredible. So if you believe that something will work, a lot of the time the brain will do amazing things to do it. So it's a tough one with antipsychotic drugs, because sometimes people might need that little push to get them onto something first, then to discuss how they're feeling later on down the line. But a lot of the research that comes out with it as well is the side effects of it that people don't quite know about. So as you mentioned before, some people might feel like a general numbness, so they might just feel like they're kind of drifting. And that's why, from the reading I've done with it, and if you are interested in kind of antipsychotic drugs and the effects it has on the brain, there's a great book called Cracked by James Davis, and it really kind of uncovers the truth about these drugs and the pharmaceutical industries that push them. And it's really, it almost leaves you a bit angry after reading it. So it's going back to, personally, I'd rather sit down and be able to have a conversation with somebody before getting them on something. But it depends on the severity of their depression. I mean, for some people, as cruel as it sounds, for some people, getting them on a drug just to keep them alive that bit longer, to be able to have then a conversation to do it, because there's no, what good is it if they're not here, if they're dead. So it's it's a tricky one. But there's an over reliance on drugs, and people say, does the antipsychotic industry and the pharmaceutical industry, they're like Siamese twins. One can't survive without the other. So yeah, if it's something that you're interested in, there's a book, that book called Cracked by James Davis kind of really makes your eyes open to the numbing effect of some drugs. Yeah, but I mean, it's part of the puzzle. For some people, it might, have a short-term benefit, but do you want to be popping pills for the next 10, 20 years of your life? It's and again, there are the coping mechanisms, a way around it, so instead of getting a dependency on drugs, then is having a look at different avenues. So the cognitive based approach, so being able to speak with somebody, starting on new habits that you can implement, like the exercise things. I know it might all seem very minor and minute in the long run, but I generally believe that if you get these little parts of the puzzle right, it's kind of building stronger foundations to live upon.
One of the ones we haven't touched on, we spoke about working out, going for a walk, talking to someone, journaling and so on. Does your food have a big impact on it?
On your mental health, do you know what, actually, I don't know a lot of the research behind food and mental health, to be honest. I know food has a big impact on certain types of foods. I know I feel a little bit less, I don't know, sometimes,
Yeah,
when you overconsume,
like when you're,
I hate to use the word guilt, but you do feel like that sometimes, don't you? I guess it's when physically and mentally that you've eaten and you've prepared a good meal, it brings that reward satisfaction. Yeah, so I guess to an extent, I'm sure it would, because that 80% of your food groups, 80% of the food that you're consuming, if you get that right, full of nutrient dense foods, if you're eating plenty of your multitude of colors and things like that as well, and then 20% of the time that you're kind of getting on the other things that perhaps aren't so quote unquote good. Not that I like to demonize any foods, but the 80-20 rule is kind of there for a reason, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, definitely. And you know what it's like when you're maybe eating out. You're maybe eating out more. You're not planning your meals. We're all human. We all start to feel a wee bit. And just like you said there, we shouldn't really use that word guilty, but you start to feel a wee bit, do you know what? I'm not feeling as good. Maybe you're just feeling a wee bit kind of fatigued and tired.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's coping mechanisms as well, and people a lot of the time will turn to food as a coping mechanism. I had a lot of clients who would do that, who perhaps weren't quite happy with how they are. So if you're slightly anxious, if you're slightly depressed, then I'm sure it's perfectly normal. Just like people would turn to drugs or alcoholism, people turn to food as a way as a numbing agent, really.
Escape, trying to get away from it.
Yeah, exactly, definitely.
What about your sleep? Does your sleep play I'm actually just thinking about that just now, because I'm actually reading the book Mathew Walker, Why We Do, and he's kind of talking about different ways of how sleep plays a huge impact. Does sleeping help you maybe with coping with things? You're maybe not tired, you're maybe not anxious?
Yeah, well, we know that benefits of sleep include kind of enhanced creativity that we spoke about before, lower your blood pressure, and also one thing that it definitely does do it's much better at regulating your mood. So your mood has a huge impact on your mental health, right? So if we know enhanced sleep can make your mood better, then it's going to have a big impact on your mental health. So one thing, as you mentioned at the start, that we don't sleep with our phones in our bedrooms. Try and think of your room as a bat cave was one way that I heard about it. So you kind of want it a nice temperature, you want it as dark as you can, and it's taking those electronic devices, trying to not go, again, this is logging out of your phone will make a huge difference. That hour before you go to bed, it's just trying to slowly bring the light down and just reset and get your body prepared that that you're going to bed. And I think a lot of people stigmatize sleep a bit. I think also that the people are a bit like, oh, do you know what, you're lazy if you're sleeping. And Margaret Thatcher, for example, she's lived off 4 hours sleep for years, and I think she passed of Alzheimer's. One of the signs of Alzheimer's was sleep deprivation. And it's almost people wear it as a badge of honor, not getting enough sleep. And it's something I used to really do. I used to feel like I had to get up at 5. I had to go and train at 5 in the morning. Now I'll get up when I'm ready to. Like you wouldn't say, babies sleep so well. You wouldn't say to a baby, "Oh, look at that bloody lazy baby," would you? Like, you wouldn't do it. And I think it's
the bad guy out of the lot.
Yeah. That's it. And I know the World Health Organization as well, they actually they looked at people who work nighttime shifts. I remember seeing that, and they classified any nighttime work as a probable carcinogen, which is quite scary as well. So it's kind of this time is such a good time just to hit that pause button, just get as much sleep as possible. And I think some people might struggle getting back into a routine after this, just because they're getting so much sleep. For some people, they might be drinking more. For some people, they might be drinking less. But sleep is so important. Like I remember when I was coaching clients a few years ago, and I'd be in at like up at like 5 and then back in at like 9, and I really struggled with it. So I did get myself into a position where my sleeping routine was much better, but it's so crucial, and I think we're always looking for like a really complicated answer. And as cliche as it is, but it is getting that 7 to 8 hours sleep a night. And people often say, "Oh, I don't have the time, or I'm not able to do that." When you write down every single hour of the day on a piece of paper and see what you're doing, see where you're losing time, and then you just need to prioritize sleep.
Yeah, I think so. And I know the difference. When I get the good hours sleep, I feel better. I feel more energised. I'm not tired. Like you say, your mood's a wee bit better. You're
Exactly.
snapping the hand off everyone. And
Yeah.
I mean, you just generally feel a wee bit better, which I think, and that's why I thought it would maybe be good. And the book's sitting right in front of me now. So I was like,
yeah.
There we go. I was just wondering where it maybe helped or not with getting up. But you, like you say, is working the long days and putting yourself under stress.
It is, yeah. But I mean, if you can catch up on sleep when you can, it will have a huge impact. I know when I started getting like 8 hours sleep a night, it was just like somebody had flicked a switch. Like, it's amazing.
So much better for it. Listen, I'm really happy to wrap that up there. I think that was absolutely brilliant. There's some great topics I think we've covered, and some of the listeners can implement into their daily lives, and also help friends and family who are maybe struggling. Where can people find out more about you or what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. I guess Instagram, really, Mathew L. Carter. It's Mathew with just one T. It's probably the best place to find me. Really, I talk about kind of all things really, kind of from mental health to anything stupid with my dog. And
Also, peeling a banana with your feet yesterday.
No, that was I was supposed to be doing. I was supposed to be doing the marathon yesterday, so we came up with 26 challenges instead. So it's funny, I actually looked at my screen time this morning. So last week, I think Instagram screen time was about an hour most days, and then yesterday was like 5.
Yeah.
I felt more knackered while doing that than running the marathon.
I feel shit on your Instagram.
I was just, oh God. But it was good fun. It was good fun. We donated to some good causes that are close to our heart. So yeah. It's amazing to see people's creativity in this period, right?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are coming together more. Do you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Run 5K.
Yeah, exactly. Like we've got neighbours in our street that we've never spoken to before, and when people are doing the round of applause on a Thursday evening, they're like, "Sue, nice to see you. How are you?" It's like it's quite nice. Yeah.
The neighbourhood, getting in with the neighbourhood watch now after all.
Yeah.
But brilliant. Thank you very much for giving us your time, and I wish you all the best, Matthew.
Cheers, mate. Thank you very much.
Cheers, buddy.